If I told you that the apple shown on screen right now is red, I would be correct. I would be correct because the apple depicted on the screen is, in fact, colored red. But now let's say that I tell you that all apples are red. Would that be truthful? Well, no, it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be true because colors of apples other than red exist. Colors like green and yellow. My statement that all apples are red is an example of a blanket statement, a generalization. I took one fact that I knew to be true and I applied it to all scenarios, or in our case, all apples. Blanket statements might appear more often than you think. You might hear them in forms like you never blink or you're always blank. Even a statement like you're mean could be a blanket statement. Well, of course, assuming that you're not always mean. Now, the reason why I'm making this video is not just for me to tell you what a blanket statement is. It's for me to give you some reasons why you might want to avoid using blanket statements. The first reason is that they're often misleading. In our case with the apples, we were able to deduct that the blanket statement was false because we knew that there were other colors of apples. But what if we didn't know that? If we couldn't prove that all apples aren't red, what would we think then? Would we end up believing that all apples are in fact red? To illustrate these effects of blanket statements, it's best to imagine them in a political context. Now, if you're at all familiar with politics, you may have noticed that the most significant way that politicians express themselves is through speeches and talks, whether it be video ads, debates, or a speech. This makes sense because talking is one way to express ideas. Now, politicians often use numbers and statistics to prove their point or to show what they've done, except that often they ballpark them instead of being precise and exact. For example, instead of saying 47%, they would say 50% or half. Now, this isn't exactly a problem, but the consequent wording of these facts could be. Here's a short clip of President Trump responding to a question. As a tad bit of context, this is in response to a question asked about his actions, or assumed lack of, to the novel coronavirus.
So when you say, why didn't you this? Every Democrat thought I made a mistake when I did it. I saved tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of lives by doing it.
In the clip, Trump says every Democrat thought I made a mistake when I did it. This is a blanket statement. He's applying a known fact that a Democrat didn't like a part of his response and applied that to all Democrats. Now, it seems unlikely to me that every single Democrat thought that he made a mistake. I say this because it is very much possible for someone to be a Democrat and believe that part of his action was not a mistake. They are not mutually exclusive and thus a possibility. If you yourself are a Democrat who didn't think that his action was a mistake, you effectively prove his statement wrong. But here's the catch. All of our previous debunking was under the premise that the president said exactly what he meant. But what if he didn't? In fact, in all likelihood, it was an exaggeration. Well, if it was an exaggeration, now the question must be asked, what did the president actually mean to say? Let's try to think of a similar and probably more relatable scenario. Imagine that you have a child who is now asking for you to buy a phone for them. They tell you everyone else at school has a phone. Now, what does that mean? It probably doesn't mean that every single kid has a phone. So does that mean that 99% of the kids at school have a phone? 75%? Maybe 50%? The child claiming the exaggeration is an indicator to us that there was a large enough number of people to make an impact on them. But in the end, that's really all it amounts to. A large number of people. That doesn't tell us a number or a percent. The president's claim is the same. In the end, we really don't know what the president meant. We're really only left with the guess that he's referring to an impactful number of Democrats, which isn't that helpful. If the president intended to refer to a large majority of Democrats, say 95% of Democrats, then this statement was misleading. In this scenario, the blanket statement was likely false, and the intent of the statement was, in large part, lost. Now, the second reason why blanket statements should be avoided is because they can be harmful. Blanket statements seem absolute. They feel decisive, and that's because they are. The exact nature of blanket statements is to be conclusive. Blanket statements dictate a status. This is that. It's human nature to want to hear something conclusive and decisive. It's satisfying. When we are able to differentiate clearly between things, we feel more satisfied. When we know that the hero is good and that a villain is bad, it feels better when the villain gets punished, as opposed to when we're not sure if the hero is good and we're not sure when the villain is truly bad. It feels awkward when things get mushy. Blanket statements create these black and white scenarios. When someone claims that another group of people are bad, it makes it easier for us to antagonize those quote-unquote bad people. Name what you will. Liberals are easily offended, conservatives have no empathy, old people are dumb, young people are stupid. All of these statements are blanket statements. All of these statements are also untrue. You can be a liberal and not be offended. You can be a conservative and care for others. You can be old and wise, young and bright. A more truthful array of statements would be some liberals are easily offended, some conservatives have no empathy, and some old people are dumb, and some young people are stupid. And while all these statements are likely more truthful than the former, they're not as attractive. Unfortunately, that is the reality of our world. What blanket statements do is that they make an already gray world and pretend to magically turn it into black and white. It creates a falsely simple world. Not using blanket statements isn't easy, and completely terminating the use of them might just be impossible. After all, it's ingrained into our way of speech. But instead of saying you're always late, if you could say you've been coming in late recently, you might be able to relieve some unnecessary stress off of the shoulders of a fellow human being.